Hey everybody, welcome to another Auto Buyer's Guide podcast hotel room edition. Because
in person.
We are here in Laughlin, Nevada, driving a Ram heavy-duty truck on the Davis Dam grade. We're also going to be talking about car leasing, the Ioniq 9, the Volkswagen ID Buzz, answering some viewer questions, and of course, diving into our reviews. But before we get to that, we should roll the intro.
Let's do it, unfortunately.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
But are you not impressed by the intro? It's not an earworm getting in your brain there?
So, this is behind the curtain, but I got a lot of the pre-production, drafts of this, and none of them really spoke to me. But it turns out that I'm not the final decision maker, and he is. So
I said you could play a musical instrument. I said
Yes.
if you did a jingle, if anybody has a jingle that they like better, you can always submit the jingle to the same place you can submit questions and voice memos, hey@autobuyersguide.com. But before we get to that, we should talk about the videos that have come out recently and the ones that are coming up soon, because we just drove the Hyundai Ioniq 9. We're here driving some Ram heavy duties, but also that ginormous Cadillac Escalade IQ. We're driving that tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the Cadillac Optic, that's happening soon. And then you're going to be seeing some Subaru things and driving some Foresters, right?
Yep.
So we should talk all about that in this episode. But before we get to it all, we should dive into the Ioniq 9.
Yes, which you drove a few weeks ago, pretty far from Laughlin, Nevada, right?
Definitely different vibes going on. In South Korea, Hyundai really wanted us all to see the range in the Ioniq 9. So if I remember, you have to remind me here, but there was some funniness on the charging, some funny stories behind that, behind the scenes stuff. But the Ioniq 9 is a huge 3-row SUV, and it really benefits from the extraordinary stretch that they were able to do on the eGMP platform. The wheelbase is over 120 inches. It is huge compared to the Ioniq 5. And really big compared to the Palisade on the inside. I was really surprised by that somehow, that it was actually as big inside as it is, because the roofline's kind of sloping.
Well, overall dimensions are not terribly different from the Palisade, right? But it's really it's the EV structure that it's all built off of. Stretch that interior space, you get more interior volume. There's not a huge front trunk. There is ample storage out back, but not a huge overhang there. But
how do you feel about the design? I mean, it's shaped like a suppository, if I'm honest.
So those are going to be your words. I'm going to leave those for you. I haven't seen it in person, and it's hard to judge, because from most angles, honestly, it looks pretty station wagony.
It's true. Yes, it's very Volvo wagony,
but it's
I would say.
It's tall, so you can get the height, but then you go, oh, here kind of station wagon proportions. It's that back end that I just really haven't figured out what it looks like in person. So I'm excited to see it.
A lot of LEDs. It's a huge horseshoe across the back of LEDs.
And honestly, I've been really a fan of the pixel identity built into the Ioniqs. That's a lot of pixels on the 9.
It is a lot of pixels. I think that the look is good up front. I actually like the general shape and design of the pixels up front. The back end is a little tricky for me. The thing that is surprising, and surprises a lot of people that hadn't seen it before and been in it, is that the cargo area and the third row are both quite large, even though you have that roofline that slopes down towards the rear, because the EV packaging there, the components in the rear, very efficiently done in the Ioniq 9, very surprisingly well done. So
and it's a big battery too, right?
Yeah, the battery is 10% bigger than the EV9, so the range is definitely longer. We can now talk about all of that, but it drives logically like an EV9. So if you've driven an EV9 before, if you've test driven one, and you're waiting for the Ioniq 9 to come out, it's similar. Not the same. It is a little bit heavier. It has a bigger battery pack. The latest version of the battery chemistry from Hyundai and Kia, it charges a little bit faster than EV9. There probably will be higher performance models coming soon, but nothing quite like EV9 GT, which is interesting, at least at the moment.
Right.
And it has a bit more room on the inside. Like the proportions, everything is put together ever so slightly differently.
I also, on the higher end performance, variants that may come, I also don't expect an Ioniq 5N particular combo coming to the 9.
To the 9.
So it might be like an N line versus a Ioniq 9N. But
I thought that, but then of course Hyundai gave us a GT, not a GT line. I mean, there's also a GT line, but
Right. It's really just what fits the build.
yeah, they did go crazy on EV9 GT, so we'll see what they do on this one. But it's in an interesting space, in an interesting world where the closest competitor to it, in my mind, over and over kept coming back to Volvo EX90.
Okay.
So in some ways it kind of looks like a Volvo wagon, but I think the reason that so many of us kept saying that in our videos and articles on Ioniq 9 is because if you're looking for something this general size and shape and 3 rows and whatever, it's a Volvo.
Right. It's EV9, EX90, XC90. You know, in that category. Obviously,
Yeah.
XC90 you can do a plug-in, but you can't do.
Right.
You get the EX90 if you want the electric version.
Because if we look at the Tesla lineup, we have Model Y, which is
Right.
significantly smaller, microscopic backseat. We have Model X, which is a 2-row vehicle by default,
Right.
significantly more expensive, faster, all of that.
And still pretty tight in that third row when you do get it. Differently, shaped.
Yeah, differently shaped, and the second row is less practical in Model X because the gull-wing doors really reduce headroom
Right,
in
cuts
some
in.
areas in the second row. So, and it's even more jelly bean shaped, really, if we're honest.
Right.
But it rides nicely. I like the way the Model X rides. It's very smooth. The Ioniq 9 doesn't have an air suspension, so it's going to be a little bit more traditional
At least
there.
not right now. That probably wouldn't be a bad thing to see
Yeah.
in the Ioniq 9. I mean, it competes so closely with the EV9. But the other thing that it competes with is the ID Buzz. Right?
Yes.
Because we're looking at 3-row family vehicles, then the Buzz has to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
But that's a very different feel because it is not jelly bean shaped.
No, and it is in some ways, I guess you might say, because it doesn't have a very, very flat front end. Volkswagen did their best to try and disguise the shape, the aerodynamic reality of that nose, and I think they did a really good job of that because from a head-on, it looks like a Volkswagen bus.
Yeah, 100%.
You start getting it to the side, and you're like, "Woo, that is a 1990s minivan front end there in a way."
It still feels shorter in dimension than the classic, but yeah, I get where you're at.
Yeah, it's quite a bit longer than the original microbus, which is kind of funny. But the original microbus, the key difference is that it didn't have a crash structure up front. It was like you were the crash structure, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the steering wheel's practically vertical. You're right there in front of the glass, and that is the end of the front of the vehicle. And in the Buzz, it looks kind of like that might be the case until you again turn it to the side, and then you realize that the driver's feet are definitely 3 feet from the front of the vehicle at least. So traditional crash structure jammed into that design.
I'll tell you, I found something very disturbing in the ID Buzz because one of the things I love is its shape and its design and its colors and whatever. I saw a couple black on black ID Buzzes at the Oregon International Auto Show.
That would be good.
And it was frustrating. Like I was offended.
A sea of
because I was like, I don't know what I'm looking at because part of its look is this multicolor or bright color, and it was black on black, and it felt like I was in an alternate
wheels?
reality. No, but blackish.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it wasn't just like all black, but it was factory black, no two-tone, just black, and it was upsetting.
The two-tone part's fun.
Yeah.
We had a yellow one, a white and yellow one with the creamsicle orange interior. That was all kinds of fantastic. The problem with the Buzz is the range, and that's where the Ioniq 9 really wins out here. They have a really low coefficient of drag. For everybody out there that's trying to make comparisons, it's like, oh, well, this thing has a lower coefficient of drag than that thing. Remember, it's a coefficient. It's not an absolute number, so you can Google what that means. But in a nutshell, just because something has 0.25, a CD of 0.25 versus 0.30, does not mean it actually takes less energy for A to go through the air than B, because
it's all comparative.
Right, it's all comparative. It just generally refers to the size and the shape of it's all important. So generally speaking, something Ioniq 9 sized, even though it has this really low coefficient of drag, is still going to take more energy to push through the air than something smaller and lighter, etc., with a higher coefficient of drag. Just keep that in mind, everybody.
Yeah.
But the Ioniq 9, there's some really interesting improvements that they made in the design. For instance, they spent a lot of time in the wind tunnel working on the underbody shape. Instead of having a completely flat underbody like we see in most EVs, they actually discovered that having slight ripples in the airflow in certain key places actually kind of helps move the air along and reduce friction in certain areas, so kind of bouncing it in the right ways.
Yep.
The wheel wells are also apparently an aerodynamic choice, I will say.
Well, why don't you go and expand on that?
Yeah, so if you look at the the Ioniq 9 from the side, you'll notice that in trims other than calligraphy, it kind of looks like it has a squared wheel opening, and in reality, it has a round one. The reason for that is round is more aerodynamically efficient, but they wanted the rugged look of the square one.
Right, it pulls everything in tighter if it closely matches the shape of the wheel.
But they gave it this huge black panel.
Thing.
Yeah, and I am not a fan.
Well, but you said calligraphy, that black panel goes away.
Yes, it's
So
all
there's a
body color
solution,
painted.
it's just financial.
Yes.
At least for the moment. Maybe that's a Hyundai accessory down the road. Maybe
Could be,
there's
yeah.
some aftermarket options. You can go maybe get a paint match yourself. But again, that's one of those that honestly I'm going to wait till I see it in person. And I think I'll see it here pretty soon.
Yeah,
so
should be seeing it soon. You'll be driving it in May, right?
I have to
June,
check the
something
calendar
like that?
soon, very
Yeah.
soon. So I'm excited to see it. Again, like the shape of the rear end, those pieces. I'm really hoping the pixels come in not overwhelming, but it's a market that's growing, right? So EV9 is doing well. EX90 is going to do well. All comparative to pricing, that sort of thing. So the Ioniq 9 is really going to be in a good spot.
Yeah.
The only downside is, and this is where we have a T-shirt, in case anyone's wondering, that says minivan is the answer, or some variation of that, right?
Yep.
Because the ID Buzz has more practical space. It's taller.
Yes.
There's not the compromises you get with an SUV, which is generally a little bit higher off the ground, but a little bit shorter in overall stack. I mean,
Yeah.
so that's kind of a give up there, but
Yeah. Range is significantly better in the Ioniq 9.
and so is charging.
Yeah, it's somewhere around 40 to 50% more efficient in from what we've seen so far. Now, admittedly, in South Korea, speed limits are very low. So on the open highway, 110 kilometers an hour, just over 60 miles an hour is the fastest speed limit they have. So we're not talking high speeds like you'd find in Texas or other places like that. That is a little bit of an unknown at the moment, but it was very cold. It was in the low 30 degrees most of the time, and we got fantastic range. We averaged around 3 miles per kilowatt hour
Which is good.
in these vehicles.
Standard heat pump?
Standard heat pump, and they're going to have rear-wheel drive with a reasonable amount of power in the base model, not the swiftest. It's going to be a little slower than average in the three-row segment, or you can get the performance models with performance that actually is really fast, 4.6 seconds, 4.5 seconds to 60, way faster than anything else in the mainstream segment.
What's the power balance on that? Is it front bias, rear bias, or pretty equal?
You can choose. So
Okay.
there's a 220 horsepower, 225 horsepower in the rear, somewhere around there. Then there's a model with a smaller front motor, 90 horsepower one, or you can basically get the identical rear motor in the front. So,
Okay, so
sorry,
that'd be the
214
balance.
horsepower,
Yeah.
yeah. 214, 214 gives you that 429, as I
Which is
recall,
plenty.
whatever.
Yeah.
And so you have some options to choose from there in their lineup. And they're probably going to be more powerful models coming soon. The impressive part was we were driving the models with the two bigger motors and the 285 millimeter wide tires.
And big wheels, I
Yeah,
assume,
big
right?
wheels, big
Top trims,
tires. Yeah, so I was quite surprised in the performance there. The charging speed's also really good. We did get to experience that accidentally, I would say, because the first day we successfully drove from Seoul to Busan. The whole 2 days was about 500 miles or so, a little bit more the way that we drove, because we drove from Seoul to Busan, drove around there, did some filming. The next day, car was almost fully charged. It was not quite as fully charged as we had left Seoul with.
Okay.
Then we got lost because that was my fault. Sophie and I were driving. So Sophie from Redline Reviews and I were in the car together. I got lost because we had tried to find some place to film. We were thinking of going to an island further in the south. Then we decided not to go there. We ended up filming successfully somewhere else. But the nav system was still taking us there. So, 45 minutes to an hour later, we were thinking, shouldn't we be seeing something different by now?
I've done that before. It happens.
So we re-entered the new address in, and then Sophian started driving, and Sophian is a speed demon, let's be frank. So I was driving very calmly because of all the speed cameras. I have to if I'm going to throw myself under the bus, I'll throw Sophian under there too. That's fine. So I was afraid of the speed cameras, and I got us lost, and then Sophian was speeding, so I probably still burned through more battery than Sophian speeding, mind you, so it's still more my fault. But at any rate, we then discover that, fun fact, you cannot charge in most of these places in Korea without an account or a Korean phone number or a membership on the Korean app, and the app does not have an English translation, and you cannot charge at a Tesla Magic Dock station in Korea if you do not have a Tesla Korean account.
Which you don't.
Which I don't. And so like Kyle Connor was not able to charge his vehicle there too. And he got himself in a very similar situation where he was almost out of power, had been going from charging station to charging station because we both went ways we weren't, it's not that we weren't supposed to.
Yeah.
They basically told us Hyundai was very relaxed, uncharacteristically relaxed. And they were like, it's your car for 2 days. You do whatever, go wherever you want, do whatever you want.
Gave us freedom.
See y'all later. And this was kind of funny because Kyle's solution was he called up people at Tesla and he got them to give him the login to one of the Korean employees gave him his personal login to his account. He was able to charge the car with that.
All right.
We hung out at at one of the charging stations that was operated by the power company there. I think that's what that one was. And we found the nicest man on God's green earth that was driving around with his mother in his Kia EV6.
Okay.
And he took pity upon us, and he used his card to start the charge, and we gave him cash.
Okay.
And whoever this was, if he is a viewer, if he's not, we should have given him our number and whatever. But if he's a viewer, he's a fantastic human being.
He's the reason Alex got back at all.
And the
not
charge,
stranded in Korea.
Charging there's super cheap too. So
that's awesome.
It was like, I don't know, 3,000 won to charge. I only had a 10,000 won bill. And he's trying to get me change, and I'm like, no.
Yeah. I cannot tell you how much I needed this. Thank you.
This is the most worthless tip ever because won is not worth a lot. It's cents to the cent really.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to find change for like, I don't know, a few bucks here. And just, no, this is you saved our bacon. But we did experience very quick charging.
There you go.
Even in 30-degree weather without preconditioning the battery, we were charging at 200 kilowatts.
Yeah.
So
it's not bad.
Right,
you stumbled into it basically.
Stumbled into it.
Yeah.
Took only 5 minutes, and we were back on the road. Got to Seoul, no problem.
All right.
So yeah, I'm eager to see it in the U.S.
Well, I'm very glad you made it back, Alex. And honestly, I think a lot of our viewers are as well. As folks know, we've been reading our 5-star reviews. We love to see them. We love that people are listening, and 5-star reviews definitely help us out. So feel free to do so. This one came in from AED Nichols. It says, high information density. 5 stars. I love this podcast and associated YouTube channel because the hosts do not fuss around and get straight to the details. I think we mostly get straight to the details.
Mostly.
And YouTube channels, Auto Buyer's Guide and EV Buyer's Guide.
Yes, and the pods.
And the pods, which you may be watching right now.
The expanding tentacles of the empire.
Okay, that's dangerous. But either way, back to the review, covering information I don't see anywhere else. And sometimes that's true.
Yeah. We might get there in leasing in just a moment.
Indeed. Now, they have a question. Will I regret buying a CPO Polestar 2 living 200 plus miles from a dealer? I do already road trip to that city a few times a year for work and pleasure. I think scheduled service should be acceptable, but if the car dies, that is a long flatbed. And that's a very good point, but I'm not sure it's as big of a concern. Well, I don't think they sound terribly concerned, but they're just thinking through the possibility. But I don't think I'd be too worried about that, would you?
I would not be the most worried about that. EVs are generally very reliable. The likelihood of a motor or battery problem, pretty low.
Minimal,
Flat tires are the main thing you're going to worry about ending up on a flatbed with an EV because there's no spare tire, but that could happen in anything.
And you wouldn't necessarily have to take it to the dealer for that either.
Right. You can do that wherever.
Any tire shop.
I would say if you live in an area where you have a Volvo dealer as well, it may be worth calling your Volvo dealer, especially for after warranty support, and seeing if it's possible to have things serviced there, because the Volvo and Polestar hardware is almost identical. The software is all in the same family, and importantly for Polestar 2, all the dealer tools for interfacing with the car are more or less identical between the Polestar and the C40 and XC40. So with all of that synergy there, it should be possible for the Volvo dealer to do a lot of support, maybe not everything, but they should be able to do a lot in the case of some issue. If it's truly battery related or motor related, you're going to end up in Polestar. But Polestar has also decided recently that they're going to partner with Volvo dealers to try and expand their network.
Yeah, so previously Polestar was operating on its own, so you would find Polestar in a lot of shopping malls, right? Honestly, very Tesla in how that started. So they're operating as spaces. I don't remember what they officially called it, but it was a Polestar space. Yeah.
Yes.
So, but then when you purchase your Polestar, a lot of it happened through a Volvo dealer anyway. Right, because that space had a couple cars that maybe you could drive, but you were not meant to come in, purchase that one and drive away with it. But now, as I think a lot of it's based on demand, right? As Polestar has been more popular, And as it looks like Polestar isn't going to be branching out on its own, they say, hey, we see the value in partnering with some of these. Now these Volvo dealerships are able to essentially buy into the Polestar network and add Polestar to their showroom.
Very limited markets. I think it's like 3 Volvo dealers. I think so. We're talking
at least at the moment.
Yeah, we're talking baby steps. So
there's one down in Portland,
right
near me. Yep.
So this is Polestar initially said that they were not going to have a nationwide network because they saw themselves as being more urban focused, more focused on the core markets where EVs were already selling. That's where they wanted to spend their time. And in order to have a Polestar franchise, because they're still franchise dealers, in order to have a Polestar franchise, you also had to own a Volvo dealer franchise because that's where the service happened. But all the delivery and servicing happens separate from the dealer. Like these dealers that are tied together, you're not supposed to be able to drive to the Volvo dealer and get your car serviced. You're supposed to call or use the app and schedule a service. The car will be picked up or taken there or whatever, and it's supposed to be separate. Deliveries also should not be happening at the Volvo dealer. But now we're seeing this decision that maybe we should expand into some of these tertiary markets in this way, partnering with a dealer in an area where maybe the volumes are going to be low. So instead of spending all the money on a complete separate space, they maybe want to dip their toe in the water, have some synergies like this, and have a combined dealership. But the future on that's a little unclear. We don't know how many of those things they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, it's like a reintegration, right? Because Polestar was Volvo, then it branched off, and now we're seeing it come back together a little bit.
Yeah, it's 2 separate things in a way. Think of it more like the British car dealership, where you've got Land Rover and maybe they also sell Morgans that are not financially tied to one another. The Polestar arrangement with Volvo, they were 100% owned by Volvo. Of course, Volvo was 80% owned by Geely and chairman Li Shifu. Now they've devolved and Volvo is focusing on Volvo. Polestar has been separated and Volvo's ownership in Polestar is maybe 18%, something like that now. So it's gradually declining from the 80% a few years ago. So they're definitely splitting apart, and part of that split is a focus on different platforms and different directions for products. We're going to see Polestar using platforms from the rest of the Geely family of things, and on the Volvo side, we do see a little bit of exploration. The EX30 and the Volvo minivan in China are built on a Geely platform, but by and large, Volvo's kind of going their own direction with their bulk products. They're more expensive cars.
So, long story short, AED Nichols, no, I don't think we'd be too worried about it, especially CPO. And the reason there is because you're going to get some extended warranty coverage, which means if something does happen, check the fine print. I mean, you never know, but there might be a certain amount of towing that's already included. If it is a repair that needs to go back to the service center. Other than that, make sure your AAA is up to date and that it covers the mileage that you may need for it. But I think you're probably okay. And CPO Polestar 2s are a pretty good deal right now.
Yep. Let's get to our voice memo.
Yeah.
Hey, Auto Buyer's Guide crew, this is Adam from San Diego. I thought I'd send a voice memo since you mentioned you don't get a lot of them. I wanted to give you my brief experience with roundabouts, ask you a question, and then make 2 small comments. So I am in San Diego, and they started adding a lot of roundabouts in my neighborhood. They provided no education on how to use them, and people do not use them properly all the time. The most common things I see are people coming to a dead stop to enter the roundabout, even though there's no stop sign, and there's nobody approaching them, and they have the right of way, and they just stop before they enter. And then on multiple occasions, I am yielding. I do not enter the roundabout because somebody is coming around the roundabout towards me, but they come to a dead stop in the middle of the roundabout to try to wave me in, causing traffic to back up behind them and horns to honk. It's pretty bad. So I think theory, they're great. In practice, at least initially, pretty bad so far. So that's a bummer. My question for you is, what 3 features from cars, that of all the cars you've driven and tested, would you put together into one dream car? So what are your 3 favorite features? That could be suspension, seats, motor, interior features, exterior design. So if you could put 3 things together into one ideal car, what features would you pick? And what would you put together to make your ideal car? My 2 quick comments are that 2 window switches for 4 windows is really dumb, and only being able to control your air vents via the screen is the dumbest. Okay, thanks. Love the show. Bye.
Yep, I think we both agree on the last 2 points. That those are easy bad ones. Never should happen.
Yeah.
Burn
yeah.
them with fire.
No, I mean, and the roundabout thing. Roundabouts are meant to make things easier, but if you don't know how they work, you are going to create problems. And there's a joke in the Pacific Northwest where we're all pulling up to the four-way stop and go, no, you go. And it's really cute. And it sounds nice unless somebody clearly got there first and they're letting somebody else go, and then that throws off the whole rhythm. So you're actually not doing anybody any favors.
No,
and,
take your right of way.
And that is amplified in the roundabout because no one needs to stop, in theory, if everything's going smoothly. And stopping in the middle of the roundabout is exactly how you get into an accident and ruin everybody's day.
Yeah,
and it's going to be hard to get out of there if it's a bad accident.
There's a better one though, because there's a video circulating around. I don't know where in the U.S. this new roundabout happened. I want to say Indiana, but they had drone footage of day one opening on this roundabout. People are going the wrong way around the roundabout because
That's
they're like,
kinda hard to do.
I need to turn left. So they turned left through. Oh my God. Minds were blown on my side.
Heart racing and also, mind-boggling at the same time.
I say this is a failure of American television because you probably don't remember this, but when I was a kid, we had PSAs on TV, like, be sure and turn your pot handles in. Your little one might grab a pot and spill water on them, right?
Yeah.
I came from a different generation where maybe our parents were just crazy or something, but the Gen Xers, we grew up with parents that didn't know you were still there. Like these bitches, this comedian I listen to regularly. She's hilarious. This is a direct quote from her. She's commenting about her parenting style and her parents' parenting style. She's like, these bitches didn't even know they had kids. They had to have PSAs to remind them, hey, you've got children. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where they are? And I had never thought of them that way. I'd always been much kinder on that. Just let them make sure that they're doing what they're doing.
But maybe.
But you know what? Maybe we need PSAs for roundabout usage. Maybe that is the answer.
Okay, my question is, and not for you, kind of for the viewers, top 5 PSAs that would come out in the world today. Go ahead and send that to hey@Auto Buyer's Guide. Automotive related, probably, but you can sprinkle some other stuff in there.
We had duck and cover once upon a time in America. The nuclear drills. When I was in high school, in junior high school, we still had nuclear drills. Fun times, right? So in Britain, earlier on, these were 1970s things. They were much closer to the fear of nuclear war.
Right.
So you guys should Google these because these are hilarious on YouTube. They had full on, here's how to build a makeshift bomb shelter at home after the bomb goes off. Here's how you bury your dead relatives, how to mark their locations in the yard. I mean, like, heavy stuff, and that was
stuff you don't want to have to worry about.
That was a British PSA. That was the hardcore, heavy-duty belt and suspenders PSA. Like, everybody needs to know how to bury your loved one.
Talking about a stiff upper lip.
Yeah. Whew. Anyway.
Yeah.
On to brighter and happier topics.
Well, there was a question in there about
that's true.
What 3 facets of a vehicle would we pull in to make our perfect vehicle? And that's tough because it turns out we drive a lot of vehicles.
Yeah.
And we will never get the 3 things that we want into one. It just doesn't turn out that way normally.
My must-haves, I think, for a personal vehicle would be ventilated seats.
Okay.
A decent sound system, and I think I might put adaptive matrix headlights over a lot, as long as they're good.
Oh.
Like a decent BMW,
you love
Mercedes.
a system that works real well, don't you?
Yeah. The Rivian one is good. It's a good baby step for America, but it's not the best matrix light I've experienced.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, the best one I've driven in Europe was actually in an Opel. Opel's latest ones are actually really nicely done. I haven't been able to test BMW's new lights, but I hear that they're pretty fantastic too.
I think I'm going to double up on the audio system. We've driven a lot of cars recently that have really highlighted not just their stereos, but their partnership with these companies. Mitsubishi just announced their Yamaha partnership, and they seem to have done a lot of work integrating that system. Not just here are good speakers, here's how we're going to make this sound good in a car. And I'm kind of a sucker for that.
We may have just driven a car that we can't talk about yet.
We may have.
That
was also really good.
And did you say that the system slapped?
I certainly did not. But
Or banged, or what? I don't know what is the term.
I'm not up on the lingo.
Okay.
But let me tell you,
Nick
it was.
knows.
It was. We should call.
We should
We'll phone a
text
friend
Nick.
Nick next time.
Yeah.
But it was
Lifeline,
good.
lifeline.
It was good. Unfortunately, you have to get top end trims for those sound systems, and that's where I usually don't chase the top end trim. That's the only thing in my car that I go, you know what I really wish I had? Better stereo. So my first one's gonna be stereo. Second one is gonna be a suspension. And the thing for me is that I have had some vehicles that have had good handling suspensions, but not comfortable suspensions. And I have been willing to take that trade-off, that sacrifice. But my back is telling me these days that I'd like to have both. So a good sporty but compliant, well-tuned suspension, I can give up some of that technical performance to get where I'm going a little more comfortably and a little more relaxed because I do a lot of miles. And the last one, honestly, I think I would want whatever that is to be a rear-wheel drive electric. That way we keep the punchiness of instant torque on an EV. I get the efficiency of having an EV. I don't need a very, very powerful motor because I like making the most of what I have. And then rear-wheel drive means I'm not doing two motors, so that's even just a little bit more efficient. But you still get the driving dynamics of having rear-wheel drive. So I think that's kind of what I would roll into there.
Yeah, interesting there. Yeah. You know what does not have a great stereo though?
What's that?
It's the Grenadier that we have. We got the premium sound system in the Grenadier, which is
it's an upgraded stereo.
Yeah, so it's an aftermarket JBL slim sub that's like this big, pancake little tiny box.
You might find it at Car Toys.
Jammed under the rear seat, and ours was not well adjusted from the factory, so quite an unusual choice there on that model.
Yeah, Ineos is trying to do a lot of things, so they can't be great at all of them.
But what you can do if you are tiptoeing into something like this is you might be interested in leasing something.
Oh, you could do leasing, but here's the thing to know about leasing. You got to know what you're getting into when you get into a lease. And full disclosure, this came up because of a conversation I had with a friend from college who asked me, as they know I'm involved in automotive in some fashion, what to do with their current lease. And here was the situation, Alex. They said, I'm 8,500 miles into my 10,000 mile lease, 1 year lease, which is already a bit unusual. And they said, so when I'm done with my mileage and I drop it off, I need to figure out what I do next. And I said, hold on, let's just backtrack real quick. How long is the term? That's when they said 1 year. And I said, okay. And when did you get it? Right now they're about 6 months in and at 8,500 miles. And for those doing the math, that is over by a fair amount. And they were under the impression that they could, once they hit their miles, they had completed their lease and were ready to drop it off. And I had to let them know, unfortunately, that it's time and miles.
Yes.
Those are part of the equation. And the one you'd want to run out of first is probably time, because then there's no surprise costs included. Unfortunately, I said you're going to have to do some budgeting to make sure that you are still ready to make your payments, because even if you're done with it, the manufacturer still wants their money. And that's where leasing can go bad.
Yes.
It's just misunderstanding. And unfortunately, I don't believe that at any point the dealership's salesperson was incentivized to make sure they really understood.
No.
I think the incentive was to make sure they sign on the dotted line.
So let's dive into what exactly a lease is, and importantly what it's not. It's not purchasing a car. You're really just renting the car for a fixed period of time. That's the best way to think of a lease. Unlike a regular rental, you're obligated for all the maintenance of the vehicle and everything that goes into it.
Unless it's included.
It could be included. Yep. Most often, though, those are not generally included in the lease. They're just sort of regularly scheduled maintenance from the manufacturer. So especially with some of the luxury car companies will bundle in a reasonable amount of maintenance. You're still going to be on the hook for I dented my door, that sort of thing. I got rear-ended, whatnot.
Needed a new tire.
But essentially, you're going in, you're agreeing on the price of a vehicle, you're agreeing on what it will be worth after the term of the lease, and then you calculate out with essentially interest. In a lease, they call it a money factor. It's usually not displayed in a lease the way you would assume it would be.
You have to dig for it, and then you have to know the equation.
Yes, you'd have to calculate it yourself if you want to convert it to the effective interest rate, but you can get relatively close if you just look at the sum of all the lease payments. Look at the sum of the lease payments, look at that together and decide whether that's a good idea or not for you, because there may be situations where a lease is a good idea, and there could be some situations where the lease is not really a great idea. The classic situation for leasing is you want a new car regularly, and you want to be able to get out of that car when you want to at the end of that lease without paying anything extra. Sidebar there, most manufacturers charge a lease termination fee or some sort of other lease wrap-up fee if you don't lease another vehicle from that same car company. And that will surprise some folks at the end, so keep that part in mind. You pay to start the lease, and you may pay to end the lease at the end. So sometimes it's a bit more than the total of the lease payments that are usually disclosed.
Worth asking the question. It's normally not an enormous cost. It's similar to the lease initiation cost or the acquisition cost, but a cost nonetheless. And the incentive then, when you go, again, this is all about knowledge is power here. When you go to the dealer and you say, I'm ready to drop this off, and they say, do you have another vehicle picked? And you say, well, I haven't decided. And they go, okay, well, if you drop this off today, it's going to cost you X dollars and you get nothing. But it turns out if you lease another one of our cars, you don't have to pay that fee. And that sounds very attractive. And maybe you want to go get another one of those, that brand, but maybe you don't.
And if you're looking at a larger conglomerate, you can exit an Alfa Romeo lease by leasing a Fiat or leasing a Dodge or a Ram. Oddly enough, you cannot exit a Kia lease and avoid that fee by leasing a Hyundai.
Right.
Because it's
Too far away.
Not exactly the same. They're the same company, but they don't operate like that in the U.S. That's those weird twists that are worth knowing. But it's important with a leasing arrangement to really look at that total cost of the lease. What are you actually getting? Does that make sense? The other classic reason for a lease is if you own a business and you want to make sure that your expenses are expensible that same fiscal year. So generally speaking, especially for lighter weight vehicles, you have to depreciate a business vehicle over a period of time. Now, certain IRS sections will let you accelerate depreciation based on the year and how nice Congress is. That's a whole separate thing. Classically, though, you have to depreciate the vehicle, and if you lease the vehicle, that can be written off in the year that expense is incurred because it's an expense. Other things to keep in mind, though, if you are moving, might move, plan to move, or just sales taxes go up in your area, your lease payments will change. So you're Washington have a sales tax?
Sales
I forget.
tax,
So sales tax there. If you live in an area with no sales tax or very low sales tax, and then you relocate to a state with high sales tax, your payments will go up because you pay sales tax every month on the portion that you're using that month.
Yeah,
That's
it's on
a critical
the
thing.
payment, not
The exception to this is a prepaid lease because that's something that you can do with some car companies, but not very many. And there are multiple structures to this too. So one side digression, we should cover this one since I get a lot of questions about our Blazer EV. Historically, some single pay leases have been a huge down payment. So basically the way the lease structures is they say, okay, we have a $40,000 car. That car will be worth $30,000 after 2 years. So the cost of the use of the vehicle is $10,000. You add interest, you add fees, etc. Total of your payments, maybe it's $12,000. So now, all in, if you were to buy the thing at the end of the lease, you're at $32,000, something like that, right?
Yeah.
So that interest jammed in there is how that would work. But if you single pay the lease, you can avoid the interest. That's the theory. So you avoid this money factor calculation by and large. There's still some fees, but you can make things cheaper. So sometimes the way this would happen would be they would calculate it as a down payment. And in those situations, if the car is totaled tomorrow and you don't have the right insurance, then they'll take the car back and no harm, no foul, but you may be out that deposit depending on how your insurance plan works. But with General Motors single pay leases, they do something really weird where they actually prorate the lease. And if the car is totaled in this window, they actually refund the unused portion of the lease after the gap insurance has been satisfied. So it's a really weird twist. So with them, on this Blazer EV that we leased, and we wanted to do it to kind of see how it worked and see if it was real. With that structure, only $200 of the $5,800 of lease was actually a down payment. The rest of it was prorated monthly payments.
Which is definitely the way you want to do it.
Yeah. So, and it can be a really good deal, especially for businesses that might be interested in this. IRS rules are always changing, but sometimes you may be able to actually put that expense in that year. There seems to be some divergence of opinion as to whether you'd actually have to move that around in your books, but either way, it can simplify things.
Yeah, I mean, leasing, and here's the thing about leasing, and because honestly we could go on for hours looking at just a couple different scenarios, is that leasing is designed to be simple. And I'm a big fan of leasing if you're looking at a new car to begin with, right? Because you don't have to buy a brand new car. But if you are, leasing is not a bad way to do it, especially if you're trying something different. So a lot of leasing right now is happening around electric vehicles because people are a little bit unsure about the product. And in a lot of cases, the car they buy will come with a level 2 charger, right? It's built into the price of the car, whether you purchase it or lease it. So that way you can get most of your stuff taken care of. And then you go, hey, listen, number one, I don't know if I like the technology. I'm not sure if it's really going to work for me, but I'll try it out. And if it doesn't, obviously you can't just turn around tomorrow and take it back. But you will know, set period of time, you can take your car back.
There's an end.
So maybe there's a 2-year lease in there for you instead of a 3, which is kind of the typical, is 2 to 3, but I would lean towards 3 personally. But then the other side of this is a bit of a danger because leasing can be, in many, many cases, less expensive than the purchase of a vehicle. And the only reason for me that this could be problematic is that you could lease a car that you could not afford if you were purchasing it. And that's okay, but understanding that chances are you are going to be locking yourself into a leasing cycle.
Yes.
Or when you're done with that lease and you say, I didn't like that, and for some reason leasing didn't work for you. You didn't like some of the parameters. You were an undermile or an overmile person. You just feel like the structure didn't work for you. Well, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to afford that car on a purchase.
Yep.
Unless you're doing something crazy like really long extended terms, and there are risks and things to avoid there. So that's just a tough one.
Yep.
But I'll counter that in the same sentence and say, it's not exactly the same. But when I sold cars, there were a lot of people who came in and said, I own my cars forever. But more often than not, the car they were trading in for a new car, they were still making payments on. And in that sense, if you have not officially paid off your car, you haven't really owned it in the whole, this is mine, it's all an asset, it's all, it's all a dollar amount that's mine. You have portions of it, you still owe something on it. So leasing is just like making a regular car payment in that sense. And in a lot of cases, people don't end up paying off their car. When they're getting close to paying off their car, for some reason that triggers go get a new one.
Yeah, if I put on my Susie Orman financial advisor hat here for just a hot second, the cheapest car to own is, generally speaking, the one you already own. Generally speaking, buying a car, an affordable car, is always going to be more fiscally responsible than leasing a car. But car purchase decisions are often emotional and not overly rational. Since I want this, yes, So that is something to keep in mind. If I were to give financial advice to someone, I probably would very rarely say lease. Certain exceptions, which we should dive into here in a moment, but I would generally say purchases are generally better. But that doesn't work for everybody, and if you have the expendable cash and you just want the new thing, that's a great reason to do that. The other reason may be, but this has a tricky twist that we'll get to in just a second, maybe because the car you're buying does not qualify for any kind of green vehicle credit on a purchase, but it does on a lease. And this is because when the Inflation Reduction Act was written, there was an inelegant portion, and the way it was written and the courts ruled was not how the writers of the law intended. So the clean vehicle credit for consumers like us, if we're all going to buy or lease a car, in order to get the full credit, the vehicle and the battery have to be assembled in North America, and the battery cannot contain critical components and, importantly, critical materials and minerals from China or other world adversaries of the United States. Quick little sidebar, I will say, not to get too far into politics, but this is why we see so much focus on North American EV production. Ioniq 9 and EV9 both are going to be built in Georgia this year because Hyundai has put a lot of money into North American tooling and manufacturing. Volvo and Polestar are building EVs in North America. It looks like other manufacturers will be joining soon. Volkswagen builds the ID4 in the United States. And they didn't necessarily do this out of the kindness of their hearts. They did this because in order to get the tax credit, they had to, but it also means American jobs, American investment directly here. We had been seeing manufacturing jobs in the US in the automotive sector really flowing out of North America for quite some time.
In a big way.
In a big way. And this is the first time in a long time that we have actually seen net positive growth in automotive manufacturing industries in the United States.
Which is one of the reasons that when there was the last United Auto Workers strike, it went on for as long as it did, because a lot of those conversations were about making sure that manufacturers who were moving not just away from an internal combustion vehicle, but were outsourcing that, were going to commit to making those in the United States and get those workers trained. So it's not just brand new jobs, but it's keeping those jobs that people already had and were at risk of losing. And it's not just the ones who have just spent the money, it's the ones who built it from the ground up to operate this way.
Exactly.
So right now, that $7,500 federal tax credit reaches very few manufacturers. It reaches a few models, but not very many manufacturers. Right now, leading are Tesla and Chevrolet, or General Motors, right? But the reason is...
Shortly, Hyundai and Kia will be right up there with them as far as volume. But importantly, it has caused, even with the rise of Tesla and their large sales that we see now in the US, the bigger impact has been the other EVs that have come online as well, because even that large share that Tesla was growing on American manufacturing, the loss in other areas was actually kind of more or less meeting some of that growth. So at any rate, back onto the car lease side, because of the way that this works for regular consumers, you don't get the tax credit if it's not built in North America. There is a loophole, and that loophole is businesses, because that's a different section in the IRS tax code. And so if you are a business, you can still get the clean vehicle tax credit regardless of the country of manufacture. This was tied in with some of the large commercial electrification initiatives for buses and trucks and things like that.
Fleets and that sort of thing.
But it included regular average EVs. Well, in a lease, you don't lease the vehicle, you don't own the vehicle, you're leasing it. It's titled in a combination of your and the leasing company's name, but you're the lessee in this title. They own the car, therefore they get the tax credit. If they pay taxes, that is, of course. So if your company doesn't really pay income taxes due to your corporate structure, or you just don't make enough things, or whatever shady business you're doing and not pay taxes, then the tax credit is meaningless. So importantly, not every car company either passes it on or can pass it on just due to their financial structure. So Volvo, though, rather intriguingly, we discovered, not only does, but they let you buy your lease out day one, so you can save on some of that money factor. So you can lease an EX30.
Top tip.
Built in China, pay the lease origination fee, I think it was about $500. Get your lease documents day one, sign into the Volvo portal, buy out your lease for the lease buyout price, which is the cap cost less $7,500. Is simple math there. You pay the buyout fee, which I think was like $100 or something like that, and hey presto, you have $6,900 worth of the tax credit.
The only
applied.
thing there, you need to make sure that you are ready to pay cash or have your own financing set up ahead of time. But that's worth the legwork for $6,900 off of a car that you weren't ever going to get that with anyway.
And that brings us along to the other unintended consequences of leasing, is some people will do it for this use case. They will say, well, the lease is a good deal, and sometimes it can be. If you total up the lease payments and the residual on certain leases, our Dodge Durango was one of these deals, which is why we leased it. Look at the lease payments total, down payment, lease payments total, the whole package deal, then the residual. There's a huge amount of discount for some reason for leasing on that vehicle. And sometimes this happens because manufacturers want to have a lease deal advertised, or they need to move some metal, and it's less harmful for vehicle values over time to do this to leases, to really discount
It's a bit more controlled, and then even if they are either directly losing some money or not getting as much profit off of that, if they get you into their car, there's a much higher chance you will come back to their car. So even if you don't get another killer lease deal, you're probably going to come back and look more closely at something like that Durango.
But the big key thing there is that they will basically put discounts on the mechanism of the lease here, and then the residual value is adjusted wherever they need it to be to make the numbers work sometimes here. Typically, though, in these really, really subsidized lease deals, the residual value is totally rational. But they're putting a lot of cash elsewhere in this lease program. You may get lease bonus cash that's actually directly highlighted on the lease. It's not eligible in another purchase, etc. But this affects resale value, traditional resale value calculations, less than putting cash on the hood of a purchase. That harms resale value more than the lease does. The trouble can be is if you get to the end of 3 years and your financial situation is not where you thought it would be, and you can't get a loan to buy out the lease, or you you don't have the cash, and that was the only way that this would have worked. And then you're in a situation, or could be in a situation, where you're over miles, you've modified your car, something that makes it expensive to return the lease, and now you're stuck between an expensive rock and an expensive hard place.
Yeah, and again, most leases are not expecting the vehicle to come back perfect. They have wear and tear allowances. But if you had a 3-year, 36,000 mile lease and you come back with bald tires, you're going to get charged for that. If you have a chip of something, you might not. But if you have a big old scrape, it's not like you get to walk away from that without issue.
Right.
And the big one is mileage, because that can rack up very, very quickly. If you have a 10,000 mile a year lease and you end up doing 20,000 miles a year, you are essentially going to be forced into trying to buy that out.
Exactly.
Because the penalty, you won't pay the penalty if you buy it, but that penalty is going to be astronomical. And instead, you could have done, obviously, less miles, but maybe you got a 15,000 mile a year lease. And yes, it costs more per month, but you're paying less at the end. And I'll end this with a horror story. I said I'm pro leasing, and in most cases, on new cars, I say, let's consider it, right? What is that money factor? What's the incentive? And what are we trying to do with it? I leased, my first brand new car was a lease, and it was a 2015 Scion FRS, released Series 1. I love that thing to the end of the world, and I miss it every day. And I planned on leasing it so that I could help build up my credit, because it was my first new car purchase, and I could get the best lease deal, the least money factor, where I was at. But I wanted to build my credit, and I also wanted to extend my payments, because that was not an inexpensive car for a 24-year-old to buy. And it turns out that 1 year later, I needed to make a change.
Oops.
And I think the car was about $30,000, and the residual on it was around $20,000. So in theory, plus money factor, I'm paying about $10,000 over a 3-year period. I ended up paying $12,000 over a 1 year period, because I needed to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And it was not a horribly inflated residual value, but I wasn't able to go sell it for what I wanted to. So not only I had to buy out the lease, because I couldn't just return it, I actually needed to roll it into another loan to make everything work. Some of that loss. So it happens. You got to know what you're getting yourself into. And I put very little money down, so I just owed more. It can happen, but for a lot of people, it can work really well.
And it's worth, if you are going to do a lease, just remember that things like bald tires, damaged wheels, those are going to cost you when you turn the lease in. Broken windshields, etc. You're going to need to claim that on your insurance, pay the deductible, get that fixed. That's not something that they'll just gloss over. If Fluffy has been sharpening her claws in the back seat over the term of the lease, this is not a great thing.
Manufacturer X is not going to like that.
With the ever increasing rise of the so-called fur baby, which is a title that I just despise somehow. Is that safe to say? Is this a safe place to say that?
You can try. We'll see what happens.
My darling cat is the apple of my eye. She is the child that I do not have yet. But once I have a child, she'll be dead to me. But at any rate, that's a whole different story. And but she can screw some stuff up.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. But the rise of people wandering around everywhere with their pets, that's a lovely thing. They have a companion. Don't get me wrong, that's not where we're going. You do you have a companion, however your companion
But we're making a lot of allowances for these companions.
What I'm saying though is, if you put your doggy in your Subaru loves some dogs. Put your doggy in your Subaru and you leased it, and whatever dog you have has clawed the snot out of the upholstery
and snotted all over it as well.
And chewed the door panels and gnawed off a headrest. You need to know you're probably gonna have to buy that lease out, because that's not gonna work. If you can, and that's probably the last word of caution here, is that read your leases carefully. Not every leasing company allows leases to be purchased after their term, or indeed at any point in the term. That was a COVID era thing. A lot of car companies were missing the used car cycle, coming back to the dealers, and their response was, for future leases, we're not going to allow lease buyouts.
Control the inventory. And in my case, where I planned on buying out my lease, that would have thrown me for an absolute loop. Now, obviously, they wouldn't be able to change my lease after I signed the paperwork. But as you mentioned, that's something over just the last couple of years. It used to be a few manufacturers were set up this way, and they've
Seems to be
added to it.
increasingly common, yeah.
Yeah.
So that is definitely something to really read the fine print on and make sure that you're okay with the terms and the conditions.
And I have one just on the Subaru note, one surprising end here, I think. If you are loving up on your pet in your Subaru, make sure you check that it has second row ventilation if you put them in the second row, because not all of them do.
Or you could get a Land Cruiser, and Land Cruiser not only has air vents in the back, behind the second row, because it's missing the third row that has in other markets, it has cup holders back there, so that way if your puppy, has
You
a
mean
pup cup,
holders.
Pup holders, okay. if your puppy has a pup cup from Starbucks, you can put the pup cup in the pup holder.
There's 100% an Etsy store
But hang
where
on,
you
wouldn't
can
the
go
pup holder-
buy
wouldn't
a
the
dog bowl that fits into those cup
Wouldn't
holders.
the pup holder be to hold the pup, not the cup?
Have you seen how big pups can be?
I'm just saying.
You could absolutely put a couple.
Saying
We're
you'd
getting
need-
off topic,
You'd
but-
need a bigger holder for your pup
That's
than the
what-
pup cup holder.
That's what happens at the end of these podcasts, which
Yeah.
is why you stay
That's
tuned,
why I
and we
stay tuned
appreciate
in.
it.
Did we noodle this in? What's the cat owner have back there? My cat doesn't like cars, so she's never going to be scratching up a car because she hates them all.
Right.
So that's not going to happen.
We might have to think on that for the next one.
I don't know. But my family certainly doesn't need those cup holders in the back because I will not swear to many things in my life. My children are not going to be allowed to eat in a car that I own.
You heard it here, folks.
No eating. I was never
Fun
allowed.
police.
Was never allowed to eat in a car.
And look how well you turned out.
My daughter can scream her little head off. There's no goldfish ever. That is a hard line in the sand. Read it here. You heard it here first.
Yeah, it's on the record.
No goldfish in the car. Goldfish other times, not in the car.
And with that, probably time for us to sign out. Thanks so much, everyone.